Willie Nelson had written over 1,000 songs. He knew where every one of them came from. Except one. That wasn't true, of course. He knew exactly where it came from. He knew the night it was written, the kitchen table it was written at, the particular quality of the darkness outside the window while he wrote it. He knew the person it was written for and the reason it was never finished and the reason it was never recorded and the reason it had sat in a notebook for 40 years while everything else he ever wrote found its way into the world. He knew all of it, he just didn't talk about it. Until Stephen Colbert asked the wrong question at exactly the right time. The late show that Tuesday had the particular warmth that fills a studio when someone genuinely beloved walks in. Willie Nelson at 90 was exactly what 90 years of living with intention looked like: the braids, the bandana, the face that had absorbed so much weather and music, and road that it had become its own kind of landscape. He moved slowly and sat carefully, and when he spoke the room leaned in, the way rooms lean toward things that have earned their authority. Stephen was in good form. They talked about the road, about the years, about what it meant to still be doing this at 90 when most people had stopped doing most things. Willie was funny in the dry, unhurried way of someone who has discovered that a well-placed pause is worth 10 punchlines. The audience was completely his from the first moment. And then Stephen asked about the songs. "You've written over 1,000 songs," Stephen said. "Is there one you've never recorded, one that never made it out?" Willie was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has texture to it. "There's one," he said. Stephen waited. "I wrote it 40 years ago," Willie said. "Never finished it, never recorded it, never played it for anyone." He looked at his hands, the hands that had played Trigger, his battered guitar, for 60 years. "I always told myself I'd finish it someday, but someday never came." "Why not?" Stephen asked. Willie looked at him with those calm, deep-set eyes. "Because finishing it would mean it was over," he said, "and I wasn't ready for it to be over." The studio was very quiet. "What's it about?" Stephen asked. Willie smiled, the complicated smile of someone deciding how much of the real thing to give. "A woman," he said, "isn't it always?" The audience laughed softly, but something in Willie's tone kept the laughter from going too far. "Someone specific?" Stephen asked. "Very specific," Willie said. Subscribe and leave a comment, because what Willie Nelson said next, and what happened when that door opened, is something nobody in that studio was prepared for. Stephen looked at his cards, then set them down. "Willie," he said carefully, "is she still alive?" Willie looked at him for a long moment. "She is," he said, "last I heard." Stephen nodded slowly. Then he did something he had arranged 3 days earlier after a phone call that had taken 2 hours to make and one conversation to confirm. "Would you like to see her?" Stephen asked. The studio was completely still. Willie looked at Stephen with an expression that was impossible to fully read. Surprise, yes, but underneath the surprise something older. Something that had been waiting without knowing it was waiting. "She's here," Willie said. "She drove from Austin this morning," Stephen said. "She's backstage. I called her 3 days ago. I told her you had a song you never finished. She said she knew about the song." Stephen paused. "She said she always wondered why you never played it for her." Willie pressed his lips together. He looked at his hands again, then at the side door. It opened. Her name was Clara Reeves. She was 84 years old. She walked slowly with the careful dignity of someone who has learned to move through the world at the speed the world actually deserves. Her white hair was pinned back. She wore a simple blue dress. She carried nothing. She stopped at the center of the stage and looked at Willie Nelson. Willie looked at her. 40 years collapsed into nothing. The studio, the cameras, the 390 people holding their breath, all of it fell away, and there were just 2 people standing in the particular light of something unfinished finally finding its moment. "Clara," Willie said. His voice was different, stripped of everything that wasn't essential. "Willie," she said. Stephen had arranged for Trigger to be on stage. Willie's guitar, the one with the hole worn through the body, the one that had been with him longer than almost anything else in his life, was on a stand beside his chair. Willie looked at it, then at Clara. "I never finished it," he said. "I know," she said. "You told me you were working on something a long time ago. You never played it for me." "I couldn't," Willie said. "Every time I tried to finish it, He stopped. "Some things are too true to put in a song. You put them in a song and they become a song, and I didn't want it to be a song. I wanted it to stay the thing it was." Clara looked at him steadily. The look of someone who has had 40 years to think about something and has arrived at a kind of peace with it that doesn't require explanation. "Play it anyway," she said. "Whatever you have, play what you've got." Willie looked at her for a long moment, then he reached for trigger. The studio was so quiet that the sound of his hand on the strings was audible before he played a single note. He adjusted, settled the guitar against his body the way you settle something you have held 10,000 times, and then he began. The song had no title. It had a verse and a chorus and a bridge that had never been resolved. 40 years of unresolved, sitting in a notebook, waiting. What Willie played was incomplete by any technical measure. The melody wandered in places. The bridge went somewhere and didn't come back the way bridges are supposed to come back. It didn't matter. What came out of Trigger that night in the Ed Sullivan Theater was not a finished song. It was something more honest than a finished song. The raw material of feeling before feeling gets shaped into something presentable. The verse was about a road. The chorus was about returning. And somewhere in the unresolved bridge, in the place where the song had always stopped, Willie Nelson's voice broke. Not dramatically, just at one word, one specific word that only he and Clara knew the weight of. He stopped playing. The studio was absolutely silent. Clara Reeves was crying. Not the polished tears of a television moment, the real ones, the kind that arrive when something you thought was gone turns out to have been waiting. She stood at the center of the stage with her hands clasped in front of her and let the tears come without reaching up to stop them. Willie sat with Trigger in his lap and looked at her. Stephen had not moved from his desk. He understood with the instinct of someone who has been doing this long enough to know when a moment needs to be left alone that nothing he could say would improve what was happening. He simply stayed. This is the moment that nobody in the studio and nobody watching at home ever saw coming. Willie Nelson stood up. Slowly, carefully, the way a 90-year-old man stands up when he has decided that something matters enough to be standing for. He set Trigger on the chair behind him and he walked the few steps to where Clara was standing and he took both of her hands in his. They stood like that for a moment, two people in their 80s and 90s on a television stage, holding hands the way people hold hands when they have run out of words and found that hands say the thing anyway. "I should have played it for you 40 years ago," Willie said. "Yes," Clara said simply, "you should have." Willie laughed, the real laugh, surprised and warm and completely unmanaged. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. "You're here now," Clara said, "that's enough." The audience rose, not on cue, not prompted by a floor director or a producer's signal. They simply rose the way people rise when they recognize something sacred happening in an ordinary place. Stephen stood up too. He walked around his desk and stopped a few feet from Willie and Clara and looked at them with the expression of a man who has spent 20 years on television and has just witnessed something that made all 20 years feel like preparation for this specific moment. After the tapping, Willie sat with Clara in the green room for an hour. Nobody interrupted them. When Clara's daughter, who had driven her from Austin and waited backstage through the entire tapping, came to collect her, Willie walked them both to the elevator. He hugged Clara at the door. "I'll finish it," he said. She looked at him with those 84-year-old eyes that had seen everything and kept their humor anyway. "Don't rush on my account," she said. "I've waited 40 years, I can wait a little longer." Willie laughed again, then watched the elevator doors close. The song was released 8 months later. It was called simply Clara. It had a verse and a chorus and a bridge that resolved, finally, into something that sounded like arrival, like a road that had been long and had ended somewhere worth ending. The liner notes said only, for CR 40 years late, better than never. It went to #1 in 3 countries. Willie Nelson, at 90 years old, had his first #1 in 11 years. He dedicated every performance of it to the same person. And every time he played the bridge, the part that had been unresolved for 40 years, he played it the same way he had played it that night at the Late Show, with one word, one specific word that broke his voice every single time. Some songs take 40 years to finish, some people are worth the wait, and some stages on some Tuesday nights become the place where the thing that was always unfinished finally finds its ending. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe, because some songs are written for one person, and some of them take a lifetime to be heard.